Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. If NATO expansion triggered the war and is now being ruled out for peace, does this mean the Ukraine war has exposed a crisis within NATO and the entire European security architecture?
That's a lot to unpack, and this is becoming even more and more difficult and complex situation to deal with every day that goes by. And I'm getting extremely worried that we aren't going to be able to deal with it, and it's going to ripen into something much worse than it is right now. It's bad enough right now. But that said, there's an old aphorism, if you will, about fighting two separate wars, two different wars. Well, one of the things we're doing right now is fighting two separate wars. And one of the things the Alaska summit did, I think, probably, given Trump's ignorance up to that point and Putin's, shall we say, ability to condense a good, hard explanation into a short speech, he probably got apprised of it in Alaska. And that's what caused him immediately to say what he had not said in the past: ceasefire's out. Ceasefire's out. It's like saying that you were coming in on the closing moments of a war, a rather bloody, expensive war in treasure and human life. And one side is utterly triumphant and the other side is utterly defeated. And you're trying to explain why one wants a ceasefire and the other one doesn't. It's kind of absurd. So he's got that point in his head, but we still have two different conflicts in the minds of a lot of people involved here, particularly the Europeans, although I don't know if it's an intellectual conception, or a political conception. I suspect a little bit of both. And that is that we have a war on the one hand that is a threat to NATO, a credible, it's going to be Estonia, Lithuania, Poland next. And on the other hand, we have a threat to the Russian CSTO, or Russia itself, whatever we want to call it, the Russian sphere of influence, that is quite different from that. And we're waging the war on each side with the conception that we possess and not the conception that the other side possesses. In Alaska, maybe we came to some similar conception of the conflict. I don't know, because Trump went into the second set of meetings with the Europeans and unwound a lot of what he apparently decided was the reality of it in Alaska. How much of that did he unwind? And how much of that are we going to have to deal with his having unwound? I don't know. The New York Times had a good piece. I don't read that rag anymore because it's a shill for the American empire, but I did stumble on this piece on my cell phone on the online version. And the guy started out and said, European leaders are leaving spas and other events that were important to them and so forth to rush to the United States to get to Trump. The reason they're doing that probably is because they have learned that the last person to get to him is what he believes. And there's some truth to that. How can you deal with that in the sense that we just discussed about these wars, as complex as they are, and ever hope to solve them in any reasonable period of time in any reasonable way? I don't know how you do that. I simply do not know how. You wade into one of the most difficult things mankind does to itself, wage war from time to time. States wage war against other states from time to time, and do any kind of solution to the ending peacefully of that conflict if you don't have, as Edward Luttwak said one time, an end that one side is utterly devastated. Think Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the other side is utterly triumphant. If you don't have that, how do you end it? How do you bring wars to an end? How do you end wars? Sometimes it's best to let one side go ahead until it's trounced the other side so thoroughly that it has no option but to stop, to surrender, abjectly so. Can't do that here because there's so many other countries that are backing up the country that's being defeated rather roundly. And then you throw into the equation that you don't have real good leadership on the European side, including Brussels, Mark Rutte and the whole crew there. And you don't have really good leadership on the American side. And you have rather quintessentially exquisite leadership on the other side with Lavrov and Putin two of the most practiced leaders in the world. And they're sitting on top of probably the best field army in the world because it has done what it has done in the time that it's done it with the tools that it had to do it, refurbished its industrial base, and I think is doing economically right now quite well. I just looked at some stats on that, and has China and ostensibly India as allies now. How do you do this? How do you work this out? I keep coming back to the bigger equation that we're in this colossal power shift. Every single element of national, state, call it what you will, power, educational, informational, intelligence, military, economic, financial, trade is shifting away from the West dramatically to the East, with the magnet being China. And the West is trying incoherently to deal with the centerpiece of that right now, which is Ukraine, by proxy, and is failing. And look at what we're doing in addition to that Putin has to contend with, because he's the other end of our failure. While we're talking about maybe being reasonable finally in Ukraine, I don't for a minute believe that, but maybe, we're dealing with Georgia still, and dealing with Armenia, and dealing with other places, dealing with the Arctic, dealing with the Baltic, dealing with other places where, we have generals saying we could land on Kaliningrad at any time and take it. He's full of shit, of course, but that's what we're doing. I don't know how you wade into this and sort it out. I don't think you do sort it out completely until either you've had a nuclear war, or you have arrested this shift of power, or you've accommodated it. I'd like to see the latter there, and you're dealing with it. People say dealing with a multipolar world. I think a multinodal world is a better way to describe it, and I think that's the only solution to it. But we're not anywhere near coming to that conclusion.
Yes.
And at the same time, we're disassembling ourselves internally. Yesterday, we had Brooks Brothers suit-wearing, BMW driving DC citizens on the street haranguing a whole bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds who had just been hired for ICE and who were so recently hired, they didn't have balaclavas, so they'd gone to a department store, bought women's hosiery, and wrapped it around their heads. This is the empire, policing its capital.
Wilkerson says the West doesn't even agree on what war it's fighting, against Russia or for NATO. Europe wants a direct fight, but won't be ready until 2028. Meanwhile, U.S. power declines, Russia and China rise, and the West refuses to accept a multipolar world. That's why it's losing in Ukraine. Could a Western-imposed ceasefire without political resolution merely freeze the conflict, preserving NATO's role and pressure on Russia, instead of truly ending the war?
And mucking in all this are three entities, which I just had a long discussion about, one in Venezuela, of all places, who are, I think, out of control. And I'll name them: Mossad, CIA, and MI6. I think there are things going on right now, and Trump finds out about them and often jumps on the bandwagon rather than saying, "What? Stop that right now." That doesn't make any sense. Not only do we not have the resources for that, but I don't have the attention span to deal with that right now. What we've done is we have put these three intelligence agencies out in the field with an entirely new playbook. I saw this playbook being developed post 9/11. I saw it put into practice in 2003 and 2004 in several places in the world. And then I kind of faded out of government and lost track with it. But in the last year or so, I've been trying to pick back up with it. What we have done is weaponized liberal democracy and put all manner, almost the same way we weaponized Christianity when we came to the so-called New World. And we weren't here for the priests that accompanied us. so much as we were there to rape the gold, the silver, the emeralds, the diamonds, and so forth, and send it back to Spain, France, and Britain. We did that with liberal democracy. We weaponized it. We put U.S. aid and all these NGOs and Quahogs and others into Europe, and we began to foment using as backdrop the intelligence agencies to do it, this kind of thing we're talking about right now, which is we're everywhere. We're all the way from the Arctic all the way down to Southwest Asia with these components that are stirring things up and making things dicey for the empire, if you will, but supposedly making things dicey for the empire's enemies. And I compare it to, if you're familiar with, it's Jean Le Carre's middle book or so. It's called The Tailor of Panama. And there's a scene in there where the man from MI6 hiring the intelligence agent that will go eventually to Panama and comprise the book, really. And Le Carre, he starts out the book. You don't even meet this guy until the middle of the book in terms of how he's hired. He's being hired. He's fresh off the street, or he's fresh out of the training program for MI6. And the guy who's briefing him is sort of the Smiley's opposite, the George Smiley's opposite. He is pure British intelligence. And so he's talking to him, and he finally, the guy asks him, says, well, where am I going first? Where am I going first? He's eager to get to the field. And the guy says, you're going to Panama. He says, Panama? I know I speak Spanish, but Panama? I'm going to Panama? What am I going to do in Panama? Not to be defeated at all, the guy who's telling him about his new mission says, the Americans have screwed up. They've screwed up big time. They've given the canal back. They've given the canal back, and that was a terrible, terrible strategic move. And we, the brilliant British, have to reverse that. So you're going back to Panama to create the situation in which the Americans will be forced to return. And that's the book. Preposterous? No, that's what these people do. And that's what they become very efficient and effective at doing over the last decade in particular. And they've been empowered by everything from AI to, the stuff that's being invented for propaganda purposes that Bibi Netanyahu, for example, right now is using to the maximum extent possible. You cloud everything. You're not listening to a person, you're listening to a bot, but you don't know you're listening to a bot. And the bot is telling you that Israel is right and that it is feeding people. They're not feeding people, they're shooting them at the feeding points. No, the bot is telling me this. The bot is telling me this. The bot is Bibi Netanyahu. This is all happening in real time, and it's happening in service of these different state entities that are trying to accomplish their otherwise realistic purposes, I guess, security purposes, strategic purposes, whatever. I frankly think it's gotten out of hand. It's gotten out of hand. I think a lot of the things that are going on right now along that arc of crisis we've created from the Arctic to the Persian Gulf in order to arrest this shift of power is out of hand. We don't even know. Trump doesn't even know from day. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't know. No one knows in the United States government at the top what's going on from any day to the next. And things are going on like what's going on with this guy in Panama. I'm going to create a situation in Panama that's going to be so bad, the United States will have to reinsert forces and take over the canal again. I'm being oversimplifying, but that's what the book's all about. That's what these people are doing. And here's another thing that I learned. The reason the CIA loves to do this, and I'm sure it applies to the other two entities too, but I don't know them personally, so I know it applies to the CIA. They're getting out of oversight that got them in trouble with the Church Committee and the Pike Committee. Remember back in the 70s when they really got their family jewels dragged out into the public and got thrashed pretty hard by the Congress? They don't ever want that to happen again. So what they've done, they've allied themselves with the special operating forces in the military, who are their direct action agents. They carry out the direct action. The CIA then has to say nothing to its oversight committees because it's not carrying out direct action. The military is carrying it out for them. That's what's happening in Venezuela right now. That's what's happening in Colombia right now. That's what's happening in Honduras right now. That's what's happening in a lot of Latin American countries. That's what Trump made public. He didn't mean to, I'm sure. He just stumbled on it, but he made it public by saying, we're going after these drug cartels with the military. I'm sorry, Mr. President, we've been after those drug cartels with the military for a lot of time now, maybe 6 to 8 years. They're down there. They're fighting in Mexico. They're fighting in Colombia. They're fighting everywhere else. There is, people to be fought with regard to drugs. You didn't know that? You didn't announce anything new. Maybe it's new to Maduro. Maybe it's new to the president of Mexico. I doubt it very seriously. I know it's not new to the president of Honduras. There have been some complaints there. So that's what we're doing. And it's out of control as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how much of this conflict is complicated, and peripheral conflicts are complicated by the fact that Trump does not even know what this triumvirate of intelligence entities is doing in his name, in Starmer's name, in Bibi's name. Bibi, I'm sure, doesn't even give a damn. It's money for him. The reason Mossad is in this is for money and contacts and intelligence. But they're footloose and fancy free out there now, and they're doing all manner of things that aren't in the interest of the people for whom they are working and from whom they get their paycheck.
How can we explain the U.S. general's threats to invade Kaliningrad? Is this a sabotage of diplomacy, a move beyond Trump's control, or proof of deep fragmentation in U.S. foreign policy?
It is indicative of something that Senator Chuck Hagel, later to be one of Obama's secretaries of defense, said to Colin Powell in 1993. Called him on the phone, and he said, General, they were pretty good friends. Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs then. General, I'm looking at a list of 3 and 4 stars here. It's on my desk. I'm looking at it. I do this pro forma, more or less, as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, periodically. You know that, General. But I'm really distressed. And Powell asked him, what are you distressed about, Senator? And he said, because there's not a single solitary name on this list. And Hagel kept up with the military. There's not a single name on this list that I would make a service chief, a unified command commander, let alone a vice chairman or a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What's happened, Colin? And they had lunch subsequently, and they talked about it. And Powell told him, we have not got systems anymore that promote anybody who is competent to the position of flag officer in any of the services. And he went into the discussion with the senator about what he later became Secretary of Defense, one of Obama's secretaries of defense. And at the end of that, he would tell me, I didn't find that there was anything I could do about it. We have killed our system in the military in terms of promoting competence. What we promote is people who either are sycophants, and in most cases, they are in either of these cases, but alternatively, they are people waiting their time to go out and work for Lockheed or Raytheon and make 6, 7, 8-figure salaries for doing very little work. So we do not have, look at Afghanistan. Look at all the wars after the first Gulf War, the last war that was conducted rather rationally. And it happened to feature Powell as the chairman and H.W. Bush as the president and Cheney as the Secretary of Defense, Baker as the Secretary of State, Scowcroft, the last real decision-making team that knew how to make decisions in an imperial setting. They made good decisions. You could disagree with the policy, but they made good decisions. It's gone. It's gone. And gone with it are the commanders in the military who knew how to warfight. We don't have any left. So that's a long way of saying either Donahue was an absolute fool, he was ordered to do that, and then you ask who ordered him to do it, Hegseth? Well, we already know Hegseth is bordering on being a fool. He's a bad manager, lousy guy. I'm told he's going to be gone in a month, making my premonition or my prediction absolutely accurate because I said he wouldn't last 6 months. And the other question becomes, the 4-star in Stuttgart or Heidelberg or wherever they live now, they move around so much I can't keep up with them, the one who's his superior, why didn't he say something about it? Why didn't he jerk Donahue up by the scruff of his neck, drag him back to headquarters, and tell him to shut his damn mouth? Nothing like that happened. I didn't see anything. I didn't see any reprimand or anything go out, but you characterized it absolutely correctly. Number one, we couldn't do what he said. We'd get slaughtered. Number two, we would get slaughtered. The Russians wouldn't take that. And three, we'd start World War III. And that has nuclear weapons use components to it and scares me very much. So this general should have been slapped about the head and cheeks, demoted to 2-star, and retired as a 1-star. Nothing that I can tell happened whatsoever. So you're absolutely right. We're out of control. We're totally out of control.
Wilkerson argues that the U.S. has lost control. Intelligence agencies act independently, and military leadership has degraded. A general's proposal to invade Kaliningrad is reckless and could trigger nuclear war. A ceasefire without a political settlement only freezes the conflict in NATO's interest. According to Wilkerson, Trump doesn't control the situation and doesn't even know what's being done in his name. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.